Hello, welcome to another random task with Caleb in my shed. Here on the hand tools side of the world. This is where I store all my hand tools. Around here, things like, mallets and hand planes and chisels and that sort of thing. Something I'm lacking over here. I mean, I have marking gauges, but I don't have a marking knife. So I want a good, beautiful knife I want to use, but I want to make it myself because I'm getting into the making things for myself a whole lot. It's kind of part of the general philosophy. Anyway, random task is all about just getting stuff done. If you haven't noticed that, previous videos, it's all about getting stuff done using what I have on hand. I have a lot of stuff on hand. Just FYI, I've been collecting crap for a while and now I need to use it. So I've gotten this tool shop, this shed, this workshop, this place where the dreams are made into the position it's in, where I've got a lot of toolage. Just standing here, I can see multiple sanders, thickness planers, grinders, sharpeners, drop saws, lathes, table saw, router table, plus a whole heap of freehand tools. So I have quite a bit, and one day I'll go through how much all of it cost me, which is probably surprisingly not as much as you might think. But I also have lots of wood stacked around, like you've probably seen this pile of stuff. I've got more sitting outside because I've just started renovating, so I've got big piles of ash sitting around. Anyway, I'm going to stop waffling because I've been waffling for at least a minute and a half, and it's time to get into making something, so let's do it. Random task style. So the first thing I did was lay out my marks for where I wanted the blades to be on the old blade. Then I got the jigsaw and I started away. Now I might point out that using the jigsaw was probably not the best approach. I chewed up 2 Diablo hacksaw blades, and then you see me try the reciprocating saw and then also trying the grinder. The grinder would be just a quicker way to go. I was worried about the grinder because I might get curvy cuts or that sort of thing. In the end I just kind of plunge cut and got a pretty straight line anyway, and sorted out any details on the grinder, which you'll see a bit later on in the video. Now, after I did all the initial cutting of the blade, I then had to cut out the collars for the end of the handle. So that's what I'm doing here. Then after that, it was just to the drop saw to make some small blanks, and then get onto the lathe, which is the bit I was kind of excited about, other than making a knife. I learnt a lot using the lathe. This is my first time. Discovered that the gouge wants to sort of follow the path of most resistance, i.e. the bit that's pulling it the most. So that was entertaining. One thing I've noticed about Merbu, very hard material, very dense, not the nicest wood to work with, no doubt. Probably why you don't see a lot of it being turned. Now here you can see me using my calipers to set the size of the throat, where the collar's going to go over. I'm just using the calipers to make sure I don't make that too small, otherwise my collar won't fit nice and tight, because it's not like I have the option of adjusting my collar. So the overall shape, I didn't have anything in mind. I just kind of went freehand. What can I do? Wanted something big and sort of easy for my big fat hands to grab. Not quite as big as a chisel, but not as small as a pen. I then decided I'd really need to thin out the back end and maybe put a little round nobule on there, because that's very woodworking-y, very lathe. Widened the throat a bit more, and then kind of just sanded the piece. And after sanding it, I used some of the shavings to buff it, and that worked really well for a majority of it. But down towards where it started to taper down thin, so I guess where the end grain was starting to come out, it got very rough. So I actually had to do some sanding along the grain after I took it off, just to really neaten it up and make it nice, so that it was easy to touch. And that was really cool. I really enjoyed using the lathe. I highly recommend just pick up a cheap one. So after the lathe had spun down, I grabbed off the blank and docked both ends so that I could use it, and then I get into sanding the end to make it round like a ball, as opposed to a funny little nodule that it was. It also had a flat section from being sawn, so here you can see me just sanding that into the right shape. So after I do this bit, I kind of get into the process of setting up my bench grinder and getting out the blade and just making sure the edges are flat and sharp. When I say sharp, I mean that sharp, like a good crisp line from end to end. So make sure I spend a bit of time getting it up nice and close so that the blade doesn't slip down in the gap, and that little yellow bucket is actually a dipping bucket so I can keep the blade cool. I'm just sanding the edges of the blade there to get rid of the markings on the edges, and here I am just sanding it off overall to give it a bit more of a shiny brush to metal finish, but I'll end up buffing that with multiple sharpenings anyway. So overall, cutting the profile, that's me cutting the extra color I need, and then I get into putting the collar on and just buffing it off, wearing it down to size really. I stick a drill down the middle, and then I use the saw to cut the neck, so that I can then insert the blade. So I use a bit of araldite, which is a 2-part epoxy glue, very, very strong. I just use that to jam it in and get the collar in. If I had to put the collar in slightly first and then jam the blade in, then I used the now useful knife to cut a bevel. Then spent some time going through my diamond sharpening plates, which are very cheap diamond sharpening plates, I might point out, just to sharpen them up so they looked sort of shiny. After I did this, I then went and basically got my whetstone sharpener and used the leather wheel on that to buff them with a buffing compound, so it came up really, really shiny, and the edge is sharp enough to chip, as you can see on the end. Now, I would recommend doing this after the knife has all been made. This was not a good idea because the glue hadn't set yet, so really lesson learned there. You'll see me here sharpening the bevel. To sharpen the bevel, I just kind of do what you do with a chisel. I put it down on an edge and rock it until I feel it go flat, and then I just grind it straight up and down on the plate. Here you see me doing it sideways, but I was going to buff anyway, so I wasn't too worried about burr or that sort of thing. I also found that I was getting the handle really quite dirty, which is why I would do all the sharpening and finishing of the blade after either really, really well beforehand, get it all done in the initial stages, and then glue it into that finished handle, or I would finish the handle with the raw blade in it and then sharpen the blade once it's on the handle. That was probably the biggest lesson learned. And you constantly see me adjusting the blade to try and get it back in. So lots of scrub mistakes made. In the end, I just end up pounding it into this piece of wood and leaving it there until the glue is dry and coming back the next day. So after a short reprieve, I did end up coming back the next day and running through my fine and extra fine stones, running the whole back of the blade and the whole front of the blade, and then the full bevel at least 10-15 times up and down, getting it nice and crisp. And then I pull out my whetstone sharpener, my Triton whetstone sharpener, and put that on the bench and give it a good go on the leather wheel. By doing that, you get the fine mirror finish that you need with the metal polishing compound on the leather wheel, and you can just make sure that the edges are really crisp and really mirror finish and really sharp. So I always find that you can do all the grits you want, but if you want really sharp, then you've got to get the buffing happening. So you can use buffing compound on a Scotch Brite wheel or whatever it is that people use. You can use a piece of wood to do your finishing, so long as you've got a compound. You can use bare leather to get that polish as well, but compound just seems to do a great job, and as you can see here, it does some nice chipping and carving. I'm just testing it a bit there.
So there we go. Something ventured, something gained. We took a risk and we made a knife. So I encourage you, go out, do something, try this. If you have all the tools I have, you have zero excuses. If you don't have the tools I have, then you have one or two excuses, possibly the lathe, possibly the grinders, who knows. But you can always beg, borrow and steal from a friend. That's what I did for a couple of projects, especially early on. Like a table saw was always a handy thing. But anyway, I'm really happy with this. First attempt at lathe, first attempt at making a tool, and I gotta say, I'm really, really happy with the quality of this.
thus far. It, of course, needs to be tested under fire, i.e. in the actual wood shop, but I'm really happy with the way it's chipping and carving, and the way it's marking a straight line. And the length of that blade means it actually kind of guides itself straight. I've done a bunch of tests cross grain on this pine. Admittedly, it's just pine, it's not that stiff. I know it's not a hardwood, but it wants to guide itself through the previously cut groove, so it's going to work really well. So I'm really excited. So I encourage you, go away and give it a go. Grab an old rusty blade that someone's left lying around, soak it in some vinegar, brush it down, cut it up, make a knife. What else could be more fun than that? Okay, playing your Xbox, I'll give you that, but go make a knife, then you'll have something useful, as opposed to just a high KD. Anyway, I'm Caleb, thanks for visiting my shed, and I'll catch you later.